Audio Jungle. Audio Jungle.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Trading, Risk and Beyond. On today's show, we're delighted to be joined by derivatives guru John Hull and rogue trader Nick Leeson, whose actions were responsible for bringing down Britain's oldest merchant bank, Barings, just over 20 years ago. My name's Chris Stanley and I'll be asking the questions together with my colleague Gerardo Herrera. Welcome, John. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you for inviting me.
I mentioned there at the beginning, Nick, your actions just over 20 years ago brought this idea of operational risk, I think, to public attention, global attention really, perhaps for the first time. What would you say, both of you, what would you say we have learnt about operational risk over the past 20 years? And do you think we're in a better place today to avoid it than we were 20 years ago when Nick was operating?
Well, look, it wasn't done by design. It was, it was all by mistake and by default. And, it certainly wasn't something I was considering at that time. But I think, if you look back over the last 20, 21 years, there has been considerable change. It's, you see a better educated, qualified individual in those risk management and compliance roles. The technology has moved on, the degree of surveillance. So I think there's been lots of positives, but still there's this lingering doubt that, not every sort of avenue that allows wrongdoing has been closed off. So, regulators and businesses around the world are still looking at the subject of conduct risk and how people behave.
John, you spend a lot of time analysing risk. What are your thoughts?
Well, I would agree with Nick. I think things have improved a lot in the last 20 years. I mean, we still do get, the occasional big loss. A recent one was London Whale, for example, which shouldn't have happened. But, the headcount in risk management in banks has increased by a huge amount in the last, since the crisis, really, last 8 to 10 years. And we have people in credit risk, market risk, operational risk, lots and lots of people actually in operational risk. That's and quite an interesting area to work in within the bank because you get to see all the different functional areas. And then there's people concerned with risk culture and risk appetite and those sorts of things. So in Canada, what we estimate is that the large banks have since the crisis, have multiplied by maybe a factor of 3 or 4 the number of people who work in risk management. And a lot of our best graduates from the Rotman School at University of Toronto go into risk management. And we're actually starting a new program, Master of Financial Risk Management. We had 240 applicants for 40 places on that program. It's proving to be a very popular program, and we're getting a lot of interest from the financial community. So, yeah. Risk management is now seen to be much, much more important than it was, say, 20 years ago.
I mean, that's great, and it's good to see that. That's great, and it's good to see that is happening. But we still see cases emerging. The Kerviel case recently, that's in recent years has come out. That created a lot of headlines. So we still see it is possible. It is possible for rogue traders to go out there and do the wrong thing. Why is that the case? Why do you think that keeps happening?
It's a big world out there. There's going to be 1 or 2 things that go wrong. But I still stand by what I said earlier. Things have improved. Most of the banks I deal with have got fairly tight controls. And there are problems, particularly when a particular trader also has some control over what's going on in the back office. So that, usually many of these problems that arise because there's somebody who who finds a way of hiding trades because they have a really good knowledge of what's going on in the back office, and they know that maybe you look at the position at the end of the month, so you've got to make sure the position is okay at the end of the month, but the rest of the month you can take risks and so on. So, but those are the exceptions. I think things are getting much better.
Nick, would you agree with that? Do you think rogue traders are still are the exception now, or is it a bit more widespread than that, in your opinion?
Look, I mean, I think episodes where people cross the line and trade outside of their limit, or possibly manipulate the closing price or a price during the course of the day, I think they still occur. I think just the control functions have moved on. They've got so much better. The people have got better, so that they highlight these a lot sooner. So I think the days of the super rogue trader, if you like, I don't know what phrase I was looking for there, but where there are such huge losses, I think that those have gone, because the systems, the technology and the people have improved to such a degree that they're caught far sooner. So it's a much smaller episode, and you look back at things like my own case, the Gucci, Kerviel, Adeboli, and those sort of things. They all resulted in significant financial loss, and it was a strange situation then. If these rogue trading episodes weren't highlighted unless they reached such a financial proportion that people couldn't ignore them, and it's a strange dichotomy when you think of it from the inside, as I was years ago. You know what you're doing is wrong. You know you shouldn't be doing it. But you don't necessarily perceive it to be criminal at that time, because you're just trying to correct the situation. But it's criminal from the beginning. If a behaviour is wrong, it's always wrong. And if you're breaking the rules, that's wrong from the beginning. But you don't necessarily make that association right at the beginning when you're involved in the episode. It's only at a later stage that you can account for that and be responsible for that. So, I think the days of the significant losses from a rogue trading episode, and the London Whale, some people describe it as rogue trading, some people don't. They think it was completely different, and I don't necessarily have an opinion myself. But the classic rogue trading examples of Kerviel, Adeboli, myself, Iguchi, I think those you're not going to see too many of those in the future.
I might just add that one of the reasons why we've seen these rogue trading episodes is the nature of derivatives, because derivatives are very flexible instruments. They can be used for a number of different purposes. They can be used for arbitrage, they can be used for hedging, risk management, and they can be used for speculation. I mean. And the real thing you have to be careful about is a trader whose mandate is to use derivatives for one particular purpose and then slips into moving them for another purpose. I mean, speculation is exciting, gets the adrenaline going and that sort of thing. Hedging is not so exciting, arbitrage is not so exciting. So there's always that possibility of a trader moving from using derivatives for one purpose, which was the purpose the company wanted him to use it for, to moving it for another purpose, probably speculation, which is much more risky. And then you have this problem that, you use it for speculation, which wasn't really your mandate, and you lose some money, and then there's a temptation to double up. So you get that money back, and actually that doesn't work, so you double up again, and disaster happens.
Mr. Hull, you raised a very interesting question, actually. The nature of derivatives. They were created to mitigate risk. But Mr. Leeson used fairly simple derivatives, straddles, a very fairly basic trading strategy. Nowadays, we have much more complex strategies, much more complex instruments. Is the complexity of derivatives to be blamed in part for these occurrences happening over and over? What do you think?
I think that we were going through a trend of derivatives becoming more and more complicated, and top quants moving into the pricing of exotic derivatives and that sort of thing prior to the crisis. But since the crisis, since 2008, actually there's been much more focus on plain vanilla, simple derivatives. So
in plain vanilla derivatives, and it was more born out of a panic. I was doubling down on my losses, and trying to postpone the realization of those losses for as long as I possibly could, and using very crude trading strategies without any great foresight or thought about what I was doing. It was just about surviving. So I think it's sometimes easy to because the general public are very worried about how these sort of events occur. It's very easy to describe them as complex and beyond the pale of the average person's understanding, because that makes it okay, or more. It makes it more palatable for the general public, because these so-called masters of the universe are using very complex products, and that's why they've had this big problem. If really you look at the situation with Barings and some of the other rogue trading scandals, it's somebody who's just simply out of control, using a fairly vanilla instrument and getting away with it for far too long. And you look at things like Iguchi, the rogue trader where was he? At Daiwa all those years ago. His fraud was perpetrated for 12 years. These frauds, Kwaku Adebole was described as the most sophisticated fraudster the City of London police have ever seen. That is completely and utterly ridiculous. There was nothing complex about what he was doing. There was nothing sophisticated. There's nothing sophisticated or complex or well thought out about what I did. It was a simple fraud that was perpetrated to a certain degree through panic and not being able to deal with my own failure. And I'm not a master of the universe, and I wasn't using complex strategies and derivatives at their core, as John has said. There are an awful lot of plain vanilla derivatives out there.
The culture within a financial institution is really important, and that culture often comes from the top. So that's why this emphasis on risk culture in many banks. I see it particularly in the Canadian banks that I deal with on a fairly regular basis. Let me just give you an example. Nick lost over 800 million pounds for Baring banks, and there were horrible consequences to him because of that. He had moved from being an arbitrage trader to being a speculative trader. Speculation, you can make a lot of money or lose a lot of money. Let's suppose it had worked out differently. Let's suppose he'd made, shall we say, 100 million pounds instead of losing over 800 million pounds. How would Barings Bank have reacted to that? I imagine he would have got a big bonus. He would have been put on a pedestal. He'd be a superstar within the organization, even if they recognized that he'd broken all the rules to do it. And so this is where risk culture comes in. There's a temptation to say, well, if somebody breaks the rules, but they actually make a profit, all is forgiven. Go on. But if he breaks the rules and loses money, then we'll throw the book at him, maybe send him to prison. That's a dangerous culture, because what happens then if I'm a trader and I lose some money, I say, well, geez, this is bad, but if I can just get the money back, then they'll forgive me for, and it's this, you call it doubling down, I call it doubling up, but this doubling down, doubling up culture tends to be encouraged. If you've got a conservative risk culture, then there's going to be penalties for traders when they break the rules, regardless of what the consequences of breaking the rules are, regardless of whether a profit or a loss is made.
Yeah. Nick?
Absolutely spot on. If a behaviour is wrong, it's always wrong. There aren't occasions when it's right, or it can be overlooked, because that sends the wrong messages. We're all human, and we're influenced by lots of different things. Education is one thing that influences, but we're also, I think, the two most important things that influence us are what we see and what we hear. So if you see somebody doing something wrong, breaking the rules, even though they have a positive result, there still needs to be a punishment, because they've deliberately broken the rules of that organisation. And it's very rare, and John may have more direct knowledge or experience of it than me, but it's very rare to see somebody punished for taking an illegal position and making money.
I mean, does it happen?
Yeah,
Ah,
it does it does happen, but it's very difficult. I mean, obviously, you want your traders to be focused on making a profit, and so punishing them when they've made a profit from doing something illegal, that is actually a difficult thing to do. But and obviously, in order to do it, you want to identify that they've done this illegal activity as soon as possible, which is where the controls come in. But no, I mean, if you don't do that, then all the problems I was talking about a moment ago arise, and you just encourage traders to, keep trying to convert this loss into a profit. Because if it's a profit and they find out what I've been doing, they'll forgive me because I've got rid of that loss.
I mean, you don't need to fire them or send them to jail, but the message that needs to go, and you'd struggle to do that, I'm sure. But the message that needs to go across is we're on top of this. We know you broke your limit. And you're going to be punished, and that punishment may not be as drastic as anything I experienced during that years, but it's the message that people are watching and they will not allow it to happen, and that works for good and for bad. I mean, I often say that the amount of times that I saw somebody warehouse a trade overnight for a couple of days, for a week, was it was definitely a weekly occurrence at Barings. And there were times when the markets were volatile where it could have been a daily occurrence. So, I saw that. I saw that people were able to do it. They were getting away with it. Sometimes they made money. Sometimes they lost money. The majority of the time they just broke even. But it was a process that you could, get away with, achieving something, whereas really you're not.
Yeah.
Nick, how old were you when Barings collapsed?
I was 25. Well, I was 28 when Barings collapsed, and I was 25 when I moved to Singapore. But that's not an excuse for my actions. It's that's what I was. And
how much was your last bonus? The last one you could collect.
The last one that I could collect. I think it was 3 years of salary.
3 years of salary.
I'm trying to work out what that number would equate to, but when I moved to Barings in Singapore, I took a pay cut. It wasn't, my motivation wasn't necessarily the financial aspect of working within the bank. For me, it was about being successful and seeing how far I could get within the organisation, within the industry, and that was the thing that really sort of motivated me and pushed me along. So, I wasn't living the typical expat lifestyle in Singapore. I lived outside of a good bit outside of the city in an area called Tanah Merah, which is in an area called Bukit Timah, which is out by the racecourse. I wasn't on a huge package. My apartment wasn't paid for, and like I said, I took a pay cut because it wasn't. That's not what it was about for me. It was the opportunity that I craved more than anything else. I loved the industry. I loved Asia, and it was the opportunity, and the opportunity just happened to be in Singapore.
Well, we can say that you were young and clever. And John, you have been teaching young and clever traders for decades now. So my last question would be, what would be, for both of you, what would be your message to those young traders eager to succeed, eager to...
You're surrounded by people that can help, that have lots of experience, that have faced difficulty and faced difficult decisions in the past, and they've chosen the right direction. I chose the wrong direction. That's clear, obvious and apparent. But you are surrounded by people who can point you in the right direction. So don't be scared like me of asking for help and advice. 28 years of age, 25 when it started to go wrong, I viewed incorrectly asking for help and advice as a sign of weakness. And I should really have seen it as a sign of wanting to do things correctly, which is far more important.
John?
Well, yeah, I mean, it is an interesting point that this is an industry where you get paid a lot of money at a young age. And, so you haven't maybe got the experience and maturity that comes with age always when you can tell that, when you see transcripts of some of the phone calls and emails that go on in the trading, you know these are, in one sense, pretty immature people. But so one of the discussions we have in business schools is whether you can actually teach business ethics. You've got to have a course in business ethics, because if you don't, then you're going to get criticized. But really, you know, can you change somebody's, you know, ethical orientation? Or if somebody is determined to just make money at the expense of other people, breaking all the rules, can you really change them by teaching them a course? And you know, I have my doubts about that, to be honest with you. There's sort of certain sort of key attributes of one's personality that you know, you can't really change in the classroom. But to come back to your question, you know, I think my parting sort of advice would not be to those 25-year-olds so much as to the sort of controls that are set in place to monitor what those 25-year-olds are doing is much, much more important, rather than telling the 25-year-olds what to do. And I think, you know, I was talking to some pension plan managers earlier today in Mexico, and you know, one of the big things for them, of course, is diversifying their risk. They're subject to a 20% rule in terms of the amount that they can invest outside of Mexico, and so they use derivatives to diversify their portfolios, and that's an excellent use of derivatives, given that you've got this not very sensible regulation that you've got to keep 80% of your portfolio in Mexico. So here you are, you're a pension plan, and you've got this person who's trading on your behalf who's using derivatives for that purpose. What's really important? What's really important is to define your objectives as far as using derivatives is concerned. Why are we trading derivatives? We're trading derivatives because we want to achieve some diversification of our portfolio, which the regulators won't allow us to do in a very direct way. So derivatives are an ideal way of doing it indirectly. Okay, how much diversification do you want to achieve? You know, what is the target? All that should be specified very clearly. So it's quite clear why the trader is using derivatives. Okay, and then you've got to set the controls in place to make sure that you're achieving those objectives. I think, you know, that is the critical thing. So often people don't define clearly enough why they're using derivatives, what they're trying to achieve with derivatives. And then the job that 25-year-old is doing is going to be monitored in a much more sort of definitive way, and there's going to be much less scope for the 25-year-old to go astray.
Okay, that's great. Well, Nick Leeson, Professor John Hull, thank you so much to both of you for your time and sharing your insights with us today. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to welcoming you once again on the next episode of Trading, Risk and Beyond.
Audio Jungle.